Well, this week marks the 25th anniversary of the Battle of Mogadishu, which left 18 Americans and hundreds of Somali soldiers dead. The mission was depicted, of course, in the popular movie Black Hawk Down. It was considered a disaster and had a notable effect on the U.S. military operations in the years since. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin reported on this for the CBS Evening News back in 1993.
CW3, Mike Durant.
An American helicopter pilot taken prisoner in Somalia. Dazed and bloodied, he is questioned by his captors.
Innocent people being killed is not good.
One of 6 U.S. soldiers listed as missing in the heaviest fighting yet in Mogadishu. 12 American soldiers killed, 78 wounded. Some of the dead dragged through the streets by jeering Somalis. A Canadian reporter saw one of the bodies.
You could see quite clearly that his face had been mutilated and that he had a large gash wound along one of his thighs. This crowd followed it down the street and around a corner, pausing every once in a while for people to kick at the corpse, to spit on it, and to stomp on it.
The worst U.S. casualties yet in Somalia, forcing the Pentagon to send reinforcements into what has become an all-out urban war. 200 soldiers complete with tanks and armored personnel carriers, and another 200 Army Rangers to replace those killed, wounded, and exhausted. 2 AC-130 gunships and helicopters to replace those shot down.
These are immediate steps that we feel is necessary to take care of the U.S. forces which are in some risk.
U.S. officials are fed up with the UN operation in Somalia, saying privately the top UN officer there, retired Admiral Jonathan Howe, should be fired for turning what was supposed to be a humanitarian mission into a vendetta against Mohammed Adib, who, despite the bloodshed, remains at large.
I don't think there should be any deadline on the arrest of Adib. The sooner the better. It would be a shortcut, I think, to stability and the recovery of the country.
Politicians of both parties are threatening to cut off funds for the operation.
The end game of U.S. participation in Somalia should be measured in days and weeks, not months and years.
It seems to me that enough Americans have died in Somalia.
Despite all the casualties, Pentagon officials say they succeeded in capturing 19 of Adib's followers, including 2 of his key lieutenants. But if this operation was a success, then the U.S. can't stand much more success in Somalia.
That was David Martin reporting. I want to bring in Luke Harding. He's written extensively about Black Hawk Down. He's also a fellow for New America's International Security Program. He joins us from Washington. Luke, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you about the Somalia effect on our military's current approach to conflict. How did it change?
Well, I think it changed a lot of things. I mean, this was a really formative event for our operators, first and foremost, and the types of changes they made to how they deploy, how they train, how they work together. You know, that's a thread that carries through all the way to today. And in fact, several of the commanders on the ground during that operation are now some of the senior-most generals in our special operations community. From a policymaker's perspective, it just changed completely the way that we think about risk, and not just risk in terms of the risk of our operators losing their lives, which is, of course, always the most important risk, but the diplomatic risk, the geopolitical risk, the things that can happen and jeopardize your ability to do these kind of important missions if things go wrong. And that's carried through all the way to today.
Were there any long-term effects?
I think there were some long-term effects. Certainly in the case of Somalia, the most immediate of that, we basically took Somalia out of our foreign policy priority set for over 10 years. And during that time, the groups that eventually gave rise to the terrorist group there today, Al-Shabaab, were able to take a certain amount of hold. We eventually got past that and started to put more people on the ground to support our Somali partners. But it certainly hurt us in Somalia for a while. A little bit more related to that, some of President Clinton's advisors cited this operation as a reason that we didn't take more aggressive action against bin Laden when he was in Afghanistan, and to potentially even stop the Rwandan genocide. Now, there's some different conflicts as to whether that is true, the reason we didn't take those actions, but certainly the disaster in Mogadishu is hard to overstate in policymakers' minds and how they thought about other operations that might carry similar risks.